Hi, I'm Paul Rennie, CEO of Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals. As you know, Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals is repurposing the drug pentazan polysulfate. In this video, you'll hear from doctors who have treated subjects in the Phase 2 osteoarthritis clinical trial. In addition to treating clinical trial subjects, some of the doctors have treated their private patients under the Therapeutic Goods Administration Special Access Scheme, also known as SAS. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Ravi Krishnan, Paradigm's Chief Scientific Officer, as he presents our exciting results from this Phase 2B clinical trial.
Osteoarthritis is a degenerative condition of joints. There is a breakdown of the cartilage that lines the joints, and when you lose the cartilage you get inflammation of the underlying bone. It's estimated that 1 in 5 people over the age of 45 suffer from osteoarthritis, and when you get into the over 80 age group, it's expected that there's about 1 in 3 people have osteoarthritis. So overall you're looking at about 2.1 million people in Australia.
It is a disease that occurs throughout life. Patients who are involved in work accidents or sporting accidents or motor vehicle accidents can develop osteoarthritis very early in life. It is more often seen in those people who've used their joints for many, many years. Generally, osteoarthritis causes pain and decreases people's quality of life.
It is more prevalent in people who've been very active in the sporting field, and that is probably because there has been either a significant trauma such as a major ligament injury in the knee, or whether they've had sort of microscopic repetitive trauma to the joints that has led to cartilage damage.
I was playing footy with Carlton still and trying to play at the elite level with a poor knee. Just the everyday things were the things that I was really struggling with actually. Just getting from the bed up to the kitchen to get the kids ready for school. It was a pretty tough time. Had about a 20-cent coin of bone on bone, so it was basically just banging away.
This is incredibly important to study this area, as osteoarthritis of the knee represents a major health issue for the individual and for society. At this stage, we do not have a huge collection of medications that help us in patients with this disorder. So there's an urgent need for effective, safe therapies in this area.
So the challenges are to provide better mobility, better quality of life with our current techniques. The most common one of which these days is a joint replacement. The problem with joint replacements are that if people live long enough, they're likely to wear them out. They are very expensive and they do have their significant potential side effects.
Our anti-inflammatories and analgesics that we use frequently for osteoarthritis certainly have their limitations. They're not as effective as they should be in many individuals, and potentially there are toxicity issues as well.
We are really struggling to manage people's pain, so we are constantly faced with the question of how can we help these people.
I tried things like PRP. I've tried putting basically artificial lubricant into my knee to try and just give it some movement, and none of those things really were working for me. And I'd called my retirement back in 2016. I guess I'd exhausted all my options in terms of trying to get this knee back to where I wanted it to, and I was actually booked in for a half knee replacement or an osteotomy. I was 29 at that stage. Those things really scared me. Having a knee replacement, you hear of 60-year-old people having it, not a 29-year-old. I guess I was really fortunate to be a part of a pentazan trial, which has given me all sorts of freedom back in my knee.
Paradigm's use of pentazan polysulfate, which is an injectable drug used to decrease the fluid content in bone, decreasing the pressure in the subchondral area and decreasing patients' pain.
I was involved with this Phase 2B study, which was looking at pentazan polysulfate sodium, PPS, an investigational product for patients with osteoarthritis of the knee joint. The specific aims of this study were to assess the benefit or potential benefit of PPS in patients who have osteoarthritis of the knee joint of a sufficient severity, so moderate to severe osteoarthritis of the joint. So this was a very well conducted study looking at PPS versus placebo in patients with osteoarthritis of the knee joint.
The treatment involves some small injections, rather like having a flu injection, so it's just under the skin, and currently that treatment is twice a week for 6 weeks. Patients have noticed significant relief in their symptoms and are quite happy with the outcome, and in many cases it has negated the need to have any other further treatments. We've had patients who have barely been able to walk a few hundred metres who have had the treatment and have gone on to do such activities as hiking up mountains in Europe.
I've seen patients who I know have had the medication, who've had some dramatic improvements in their symptoms. And I've also seen a couple of younger patients who are elite footballers who, after a series of treatments, have returned to playing a high-level football.
There's opioids and there's anti-inflammatories, but it's basically a band-aid fix where this is stopping the disease in its tracks. There's a statistic out there that's saying that 95% of AFL footballers come out of the system with joint issues or some sort of osteoarthritis in a joint. There's finally such a good news story for those players that they don't have to suffer. It's a massive game changer for anybody that is suffering with OA. It's a once a year, once a 2 year treatment versus an everyday treatment for the rest of your life, so it's very exciting.
This study was designed specifically to look at osteoarthritis of the knee. It's a very common condition. We're looking at 50% of people in their 80s will be suffering from osteoarthritis of the knee, and so far the data shows that it is effective in this group. And the top line data so far certainly shows that there is a benefit of PPS, pentosan polysulfate sodium, in patients with moderate osteoarthritis of the knee joint.
The clinical trial was deemed successful because the clinical trial met its primary endpoint. The primary endpoint involved a clinical meaningful response to pain from baseline and also statistical significance relative to placebo in subjects with knee osteoarthritis. Essentially, Paradigm's trial success has been attributed to the inclusion of an optimal study population. In the scientific literature, people with a high pain stratum have been associated with a high placebo effect. This has led to the demise of several chronic pain studies. Now, being mindful of this, Paradigm's study design involved stratification of participants into 2 pain strata. This allowed us to define the 4 to 6 NRS pain score, or the moderate pain score, as the optimal study population in this trial. Therefore, Paradigm's report will include endpoints achieved with the moderate pain stratum, since the numbers in the severe pain stratum were too low to derive conclusive data. Now, this graph here highlights that the primary endpoints of the trial have been met. The y-axis here demonstrates the subjects who have responded with a clinically meaningful response of greater than 50% reduction in pain from baseline, as measured by the Coos pain subscale. As you can see, subjects in the PPS treatment group, that is 46.2%, have shown a larger number of subjects that have responded with a pain score of greater than 50% compared to 22.5% in the placebo group. This is significant at a p-value less than 0.026. In summary, PPS treatment has yielded a clinically meaningful and a statistically relevant response from baseline compared to the placebo group. Like the data for day 53, the data for day 39 are statistically significant for PPS treatment at a p-value less than 0.021 compared to placebo. This slide demonstrates using the NRS pain scale in comparison to the Coos pain scale. The data as shown in this graph are statistically significant for PPS treatment at day 39 at a p-value less than 0.0008 and at day 53 at a p-value less than 0.02 compared to placebo. This graph highlights the consistency of improved pain response compared to placebo in a clinically meaningful manner post-treatment. In addition, there's a similar response between the 2 pain measuring methods. Paradigm's clinical and regulatory team are expeditiously trying to complete the analysis for the secondary endpoints of the study. The final report of the complete study will be available to the market in the first quarter of calendar year 2019. These data will be further prepared for publication in scientific journals as well as presented in international conferences in orthopedics and rheumatology.
So in conclusion, you've heard from doctors in the clinical trial that there is an urgent need for safe and effective medications for the treatment of osteoarthritis. You also heard from Dr. Ravi Krishnan, Paradigm's Chief Scientific Officer, that the trial was an incredible success. In addition to the osteoarthritis trial, Paradigm will be reading out the results of the Ross River Phase 2A clinical trial in Q1 2019. I would also like to announce that Paradigm has plans in calendar year 2019 to commence a Phase 2B clinical trial in the orphan indication of mucopolysaccharidosis. It's a very exciting time at Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals. I'd like to thank all of the people involved in bringing this clinical trial to a conclusion. I'd also like to thank all of our investors and shareholders for their ongoing and continued support in Paradigm. Thank you.